Hello everyone, and welcome back to Daily Kaylee. This is the first episode that I'm releasing post 13 days of Halloween. I took a little break to do some research, and I found some very interesting cases that I want to talk about on here before the end of the year. This episode is the first on the list, and it is called The Barbecue Murders. It intrigued me for obvious reasons, because what on earth are the barbecue murders? So I read about it, took some notes, and I think you guys are going to agree with me that this is crazy. So, like I said, the barbecue murders. It refers to the double murder of Jim Olive and his wife, Naomi Olive, in 1975. This murder took place in Marin County, California. A little bit of background. Jim Olive, well, his legal name was James, but he goes by Jim. He is a businessman. He has a wife, Naomi, who stays at home. And they also have a 16-year-old adopted daughter named Marin Olive. They are originally from Ecuador. Marin was born in Norfolk, Virginia, to an unmarried mother. She was given up for adoption. They didn't have any background about her mom. She's adopted as a newborn by Jim and Naomi. Like I said, they are originally from Ecuador. That is where Jim worked. He was a marketing executive for Gulf Oil Company. So most of Marlene's childhood, she lived in Ecuador. She was very close to Jim, her adoptive father, but she had a troubled relationship with her adoptive mother, Naomi. Apparently, this has not been proven, but it's been reported. Naomi had issues with alcoholism, and she had an abundance of mental health issues, which back then it was a lot more taboo to talk about that and get treatment. They believed she had schizophrenia. When Marlene was 14, Jim lost his job, so they moved back to the United States, and this is where they settled in Marin County, California. They lived in the community. I said that backwards. They lived in the city of San Rafael, and they lived in the Terra Linda community, which was, a little neighborhood. Jim is obviously looking for a new job now that they're back in the U.S. He becomes a self-employed small business consultant. So he makes his own hours, he finds his own clients, you get the gist. Because of this, him and Marlene are not spending as much time together. He has to make his own hours to make money, so he's trying to work as much as possible. He doesn't really have a set schedule where he can come home in the evenings and be with her. Obviously, as a young girl, well, she's a young teen, who has spent her entire childhood being really close to her dad, this is going to cause some issues. She had difficulty adjusting to this new life. In Ecuador, things were a lot different for teenagers there. You didn't see teens going out and partying and staying out late and things like that. So now that she is in California, this is strange to her. This is completely different. Marlene has developed a stomach ulcer. She goes to be seen with a doctor, and they give her prescription medication to deal with it. Doesn't seem like big news or anything. But after this, she starts to use other drugs, and namely pills, recreationally, and she socializes with other teenagers who are doing this. So I guess you could say she is immediately becoming friends with the wrong crowd. She becomes interested in witchcraft and prostitution and all of this crazy shit that she had never heard of in Ecuador. Because of this, Naomi repeatedly calls her a whore and all of these things, which you should not say to a 14-year-old child. But that is what happened with her adoptive mother. After they moved to the U.S. and Marlene starts all this new behavior, her already tense relationship with Naomi just gets worse. It is terrible, and soon their arguments begin to switch into domestic violence. It is no longer just verbal disagreements. Over time of this happening, Marlene begins to also resent her father. For one, he's never home anymore. He's always working. He doesn't have time for her. And two, he is taking the side of her mother because he's concerned about her as well. She is a young girl. She doesn't see it that way. She doesn't think what she's doing is wrong or whatever the word I'm looking for. She just thinks that he's taking her side. He's not there for her anymore. He's different. She shoplifts. She steals her parents' credit cards. She uses drugs. She runs away from home. All of this behavior that is unlike her. She's never done anything like this, and now this is who she is. It's a mix of her experimenting with new things and a mix of her rebelling against her parents because she thinks at that age that she knows everything. She knows what she's doing. She apparently talks to several of her friends about wanting to kill her parents and asked some of them to help her do it. Obviously, at that age, your friends don't take you seriously. They're like, whatever, she's not going to kill her parents. So they didn't take her seriously. At one point, she attempted to poison Naomi herself. She mixed in large doses of prescription drugs into her mother's food. But the drugs made the food taste bitter, as you can imagine. So she refused to eat it. And I guess she had no idea that she was going to be poisoned. But she's like, I'm not eating this. You made it and it's disgusting. While in California, Marlene becomes involved with a man of the name Charles Riley, who goes by Chuck. He is a few years older than Marlene. He's about 4 years older than her. He's lived most of his life in California. His parents were not very well off. His father worked in a bakery and his mom was a nurse's aide. There's not really much to say about him. He was a slacker. I'll just give you his background and you can kind of put the picture together yourself. But he was obese since he was a child. He weighed over 300 pounds by the age of 15. He didn't have a lot of close friends. He had never even had a girlfriend before he met Marlene. He dropped out of high school in his senior year, so he didn't complete high school. He worked as a newspaper delivery man and a pizza delivery man. He worked as a bartender, a factory worker. He was back and forth between jobs. He was a heavy drug user and drug dealer. Not only to support himself and make money, but to gain social status, like popularity. He wanted to be known. He owned several guns. That was one of his only hobbies. When he met Marlene, he was 19 years old, and Marlene was only 15. He was at her high school dealing drugs to high school students. Which, as you can imagine, like I said before, why is a grown man hanging out at a high school? You're getting the gist of his personality here. So he has a crush on Marlene. He begins to pursue her. He wants to go out with her. Initially, she's kind of put off by it. She didn't really want anything to do with him. But eventually, they have sex somehow, and then they begin a relationship. Apparently, this relationship was heavily controlled by Marlene. She wore the pants in this relationship, I guess you could say. Riley would give her free drugs, gifts. He would drive her around, listen to her problems. And he sometimes helped her carry out both sexual and criminal fantasies. She frequently threatened to break up with Chuck Riley unless he did what she wanted. And then she claimed that she had magical powers and she could control him. And apparently he believed this. Aside from her having magical powers, he liked her a lot. He wanted to please her, so he did whatever she asked of him. Apparently, they had a rocky relationship because she had tried to break up with him a couple times, and he twice attempted suicide because of it. They get back together, blah, blah, blah. Now, Marlene has had a few previous boyfriends, none as serious as Chuck Riley, but she begins to ask him for help killing her mother. And according to some of her previous boyfriends, she had asked them the same thing, and they didn't take her seriously, or they just did not want to get involved. She asked for either help or advice in killing her mother, Or she would suggest that he kill both of her parents so that she wouldn't have to get involved. Initially, Jim and Naomi both approved of their daughter dating Chuck Riley. They thought he was nice, he was responsible, he was a good role model. They clearly didn't know anything about him, but that's what they thought at first. So they were like, okay, maybe this will be a good influence on her. According to Chuck Riley, after he was arrested, Marlene suggested that they carry out an extensive shoplifting spree. They stole approximately $6,000 in merchandise, which was mainly like clothes and accessories for Marlene. This happened over several weeks from multiple stores, and they were finally caught and arrested for grand larceny in March of 1975. Even though Chuck was a drug dealer and he was obviously doing some sketchy shit, this was the first time he had ever been arrested. He didn't have any delinquency on his record as a minor. This was his first arrest, and he was an adult. 2 months later, in May of 1975, Chuck was arrested again because he had marijuana and a sawed-off shotgun in his possession. After this, Jim and Naomi threatened Marlene that they would send her off to juvenile hall. They would send her away to a boarding school. They would do whatever it took and forbid her to see Chuck Riley again, because he's obviously not the guy that they thought he was. Reportedly, Jim ordered Chuck Riley to stay away from their house or he would kill him if he returned. That's hearsay, but either way, he wanted his daughter to stay away from him. They were not allowed to see each other. On Saturday, June 21st, 1975, Marlene and Naomi had another argument, which was pretty common. She then calls Chuck and tells him, "Get your gun, we've got to kill the bitch today." She makes plans to go out with her father and spend some time together, meaning that Naomi would be home alone and she'd be alone. So when they leave, Marlene leaves one of the doors unlocked so that Chuck can come in to kill Naomi while they're gone. Chuck enters the house and he says that Naomi was sleeping when he entered. He was carrying a loaded revolver, and he also said he had taken LSD. After the incident, Chuck told police that he had struck Naomi multiple times with a hammer, and he had also stabbed and suffocated her. Chuck was still in the house when Marlene and Jim returned. Jim saw his wife lying in bed, and she was covered in blood. He picked up a knife and charged at Riley, exclaiming, "I will kill you." Which, in that situation, I'm pretty sure a lot of us would act the same way. Your wife has been murdered by your daughter's insane ex-boyfriend. Chuck takes out his gun, shoots Jim 4 times, and kills him. So now both her parents are dead. Marlene and Chuck both tried to dispose of the bodies. They transported them to a wooden area at a place called China Camp. You may have not heard this before. I hadn't heard of it before this case. But it's basically just a piece of wilderness that was used as teenagers in California to party. They called it China Camp. I don't know why. It was later turned into part of a national park, so it's not like a thing anymore. But they take the bodies there, and they burn them in a barbecue pit with gasoline and wooden logs. They are doing this in an attempt to make them unrecognizable, so that even if someone finds the remains, they won't know who this is or what happened. Chuck and Marlene leave the area while the bodies are still burning. They did not complete the job yet. Someone called the fire department because there was an unattended fire at this park. The firemen who arrived to put out the fire thought that the partially burnt remains were actually a deer carcass because they had already been transformed so much in the process that they didn't appear to be human. Marlene and Chuck later returned to the park to see if the job was done, noticed the fire had been put out. So they restart the fire and further burn the remains along with some evidence they brought from the house. They tell some of their friends what happened, and they ask one of their friends to come help them clean up the house. So Chuck, Marlene, and the friend clean up the bedroom where both of her parents were killed. They removed blood from the carpet, walls, furniture. They made this room spotless. They told this friend exactly what happened. And Riley told them that they had to do it because they wouldn't let him see Marlene, which seemed like a perfectly good excuse at this time for a teenage boy. So after the killings take place, after they've cleaned everything up, they've gotten rid of the evidence, Marlene and Chuck continue to live together at the Olive house. For several days, they attend a concert together, they go shopping, they eat out at restaurants, and all of this money that they're spending is taken from her dead parents. Cash, checks, credit cards, everything. Apparently, their plan was to wait for Jim and Naomi to be declared dead. They would collect the life insurance money, and then they were going to move back to Ecuador, where Marlene was from. They thought that was a foolproof plan. However, after a few days, Jim's business partner is concerned about how he's been absent from work. He hasn't been meeting with clients. So he talks to the police. The police then come to visit the Olive house, and they find Marlene, and they speak to her. She gave the police multiple different alibis for herself and for Chuck, and they later obviously determined that these were false. But however, she also told the police that her parents had either disappeared or that they had died, and she claimed that one parent had killed the other and then disappeared with the body, or that both parents were killed by Hell's Angels, which was a motorcycle club in California at the time. Either way, she clearly had thought this out. The police also noted that the house was a fucking mess, but the room where her parents were killed had obviously been recently cleaned. It was the only clean area in the house. They obviously asked for tips, they talked to the community, and eventually they did talk to the friend who helped clean the bedroom. And she came clean. She told the police what they had told her, that they had killed the Olives and burned their bodies, and she had just helped them clean up. She didn't know what really happened. Because of the information they got from his friend, the police searched the China Camp barbecue pit, and they determined that it contained fragments of burnt human remains. This was all they needed to arrest Marlene and Chuck before they even determined who these remains belonged to. After he was arrested, however, Chuck Riley made a detailed confession, and he said that him and Marlene both had been planning to kill her parents for quite some time, and that he had beaten, stabbed, and suffocated Naomi Olive, and then he shot Jim Olive. He also said that Marlene had made him do it. However, Marlene claimed that Chuck had killed her parents of his own accord. She had no idea what was happening, and that afterward he had held her hostage and forced her to take drugs. Based on the information we have heard so far, I'm sure you can determine which one was actually telling the truth, but those are their stories. Because Chuck confessed and because he was an adult, he was 20 at the time of the crime, he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and he faced the death penalty. However, they ended up revoking the death penalty, and he was then given life with the possibility of parole. He also said during court that when he entered the house, he was not the one who had beaten Naomi Olive. He was actually put under hypnosis to figure out what exactly happened. While he was hypnotized, he says that he did not actually beat her with a hammer. He said when he entered the house, he found her already lying in bed, bleeding from head wounds and near death, and that the hammer was embedded in her head. So Chuck then says Marlene had done this. She had fatally beaten her mother with a hammer before leaving the house. And then Chuck came in and stabbed and suffocated her to try to end her suffering. He said that he had initially confessed to killing Naomi because he wanted to protect Marlene. However, then she fucking turned on him and said that it was all his idea, so he then admits that this is the true story. He then says he did shoot Jim Olive, obviously, but he said that he acted out of fear and self-defense because Jim was coming at him with a knife, threatening to kill him. Like I said, he testified about the revelation he had while under hypnosis. He testified this at the trial. The jury did not believe him, which honestly is not shocking. So he was convicted on both counts of first-degree murder. Like I said, they revised his death penalty, and he is serving life in prison with the possibility of parole. I don't know if that's changed, so I'm going to look that up before I end the episode. But from my notes, that's what happened. I don't know if he ever got parole or if they've changed that, but we'll see. Now, Marlene, she was only 16 at the time. So she was tried as a juvenile. At this time, it was not a thing to charge children as adults in certain circumstances. So she was charged as a juvenile. This is just insane to me. But she was obviously found guilty of either encouraging, instigating, aiding, or acting as an accomplice in the homicides of her parents. Therefore, she was sentenced to 4 to 6 years, only 4 to 6 years, at the California Youth Authority at Ventura, which is also known as the Ventura School. It's basically just like it's basically a boarding school for criminals, if that makes sense. She was set to be released by her 21st birthday, unless the school determined she had not been rehabilitated and had not obviously shown remorse for her crimes. In that case, she could legally be kept there until she was 23. However, she was released at the age of 21, which is a little over 4 years. I think that is insane. Let me tell you about Chuck Riley, because I found some information here. So, like I said, they reversed his death penalty. So, there we go. He's in prison. Riley actually was showing that he was being rehabilitated. Not unlike Marlene, because clearly she was. But he was actually making an effort. He wasn't just serving a sentence. So, he had the possibility of parole after 7 years in prison. While he was in prison, he lost weight, he got his high school diploma, and he even earned the equivalent of a college degree. He was trying to better himself. After he became eligible for parole, he reportedly applied for parole like a dozen times, and he was denied every single time. However, let's not forget, in 2011, Chuck, who was 56 in 2011, he was also physically disabled. He had still been trying to apply for parole, and he appealed his most recent denial. He also said that there was no evidence that he continued to be a danger to the community. He was old, he was disabled, whatever. However, the parole board did not consider his age at all. He got a new court-ordered parole hearing. At this hearing, the parole board found him suitable for release and then granted him parole. However, before he could be released, on February 6, 2015, the parole board's decision was overturned by California Governor Jerry Brown, who explained that although that he accepts some responsibility for what he did, he continues to downplay his role in the crime, and he does not seem like he believes he's actually fully guilty. So he says, until Chuck Riley is able to come to terms with his role in this crazy situation, he does not believe he will be able to avoid violent behavior if released. They went back and forth in court over this for a while. And essentially, I'll save you the boring details. The governor's decision was reversed, and he was granted parole as of December 8th, 2015. There's nothing much about his life after that, so I'm sure he's just trying to keep it low-key and stay out of the spotlight. Let's talk about Marlene. So, she served her sentence at the school. She was doing good. She was later allowed to serve the last part of her sentence living outside of the school. However, she had to stay with a young woman who had been a juvenile services volunteer. So she was supervised, basically. However, just a few weeks before Marlene was due for parole, she escaped and she runs off to New York City to be a prostitute. She was eventually arrested and returned to California to finish her sentence, and she was finally released in 1980 when she was 21. She had the option to get out of there so much earlier, and she blew it. After being released, she moved to the Los Angeles area. So she's from Northern California, and she moved to Southern California. She changed her name multiple times, and she was arrested at least 7 different times over the next 10 years. That is almost once a year when you think about it. She was arrested on multiple charges: forgery, drug-related charges, everything. She served 2 one-year terms in jail. In 1986, she was one of the 14 people that were arrested in Los Angeles for allegedly operating a large forgery ring. And she is thought to have been the ringleader who started it all. She was sentenced and convicted to 5 years in prison. She has served additional prison terms since then for a multitude of crimes. And that is just sort of what her life has been. Which leads me to believe she definitely brainwashed Chuck Riley into murdering her parents. According to Chuck, Marlene came to visit him only once after they were both arrested, and she visited him in prison in 1981. After the visit, whatever had happened, whatever she had said during the visit, Chuck Riley says, "I will never see her again." And he was right. She never came back to visit. What do you guys think of this whirlwind of events? Please let me know. You guys can message me on Instagram or Facebook. I want to hear your thoughts on this case. I thought it was absolutely mind-boggling. I'll see you guys in probably about a week for the next episode, and it's just as crazy as this one. Bye, guys.